Welcome back to the Financial Freedom Show. My name is Rob Berger, and today we're going to talk about a concept called a beautiful constraint. I don't know if you've ever heard of that term. It's not one that I hear talked about a lot, and it is an incredibly powerful concept that can help you with everything from your money to investing to your career, business, I think relationships, personal productivity. It's a simple concept. And to introduce it, by the way, I should say, if you're new here, again, Rob Berger, would love to have you subscribe to the channel. The whole channel is designed to produce content that helps you achieve financial freedom. You know, with confidence, with and some hope. I guess part of this idea of this channel is to give folks hope when it comes to their finances, their career, their businesses. Yeah, so if you're interested in that sort of thing, subscribe. Beautiful constraint. I want to start this off with a story. It's a true story, as it turns out. It happened to me. So it occurred in 2005. It's when the light bulb went off I should say, for me, that the best thing money can buy is financial freedom. Before that time, I think I was probably like most folks. You know, I made a good salary. Now I was a lawyer, but I'd left private practice, took a huge pay cut. In 2005, I was working for the government, certainly making a decent income, no complaints, but I wasn't, like making the kind of money a partner at a big law firm would make. I gave that up. I was at a firm called Winston and Strawn in their DC office. It's a Chicago-based firm. It's an international firm. I gave all that up. So I was working in the government, making a good salary, but not like, lawyers can make. And but I had decided that rather than thinking about money buying me stuff, a nice car, a bigger house, whatever. And by the way, if you can achieve those things and still have financial freedom, more power to you. I'm not here to tell anyone how they should spend their money. But my idea was financial freedom should be the most important thing. More important than a golf club membership, more important than a fancy car, more important than a big house, fancy vacations. Fortunately, my wife agreed, so I had that going for me. And the other thing was, it was more important than getting out of debt, which may seem strange. Certainly, getting out of debt, I think, is an important part of achieving financial freedom, although I actually don't think it's required. In fact, I achieved financial freedom while I still had debt on investment properties that we were renting out, and I think I absolutely achieved financial freedom. So debt is important, but it's not actually the goal. The goal is financial freedom, perhaps getting out of debt. Certainly soul-crushing sort of lifestyle debt particularly is part of it, but financial freedom is really the goal. So 2005, it was June. In fact, I can tell you it was June 15th, 2005 at 6:31 p.m. I know that because I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this. I actually made a note. Not sure if we can focus in on that. In any event, I was listening to the Dave Ramsey show, and I'll be honest, I'm not really a Dave Ramsey fan. I mean, in the sense that I don't really listen to his show, haven't read any of his books. I mean, I know what he stands for, and I think generally it's pretty good. But for some reason, I was down in my shop at our old home. This is 16 years ago, before I started my first personal finance blog. And I was listening to the Dave Ramsey show, and if you ever heard it, you get all these people that come on and they scream, "We're debt free," right? And after about the third person to scream that, I thought, that's what I want. Not because debt freedom is the ultimate goal, but because it's part of achieving financial freedom. So here's what I wrote. June 15th, 2005 at 6:31 p.m. I have no idea why I've recorded the time, but Eastern time, if you care. I will be totally debt free by June 15th, 2012. So in other words, in 7 years, I would be totally debt free. That includes the mortgage. We had a mortgage at that time, home equity line of credit. Of course, some credit cards. We had student loans. Both, I think my wife, I know I did. I think my wife had some too. And here's the thing. No matter how you crunched the numbers, it was absolutely impossible for us to be debt-free anywhere near 7 years. In 7 years. It was just impossible. But I didn't care. And what I didn't know then was that what I had just created in that little simple note was a beautiful constraint. And the concept comes from this book, A Beautiful Constraint. It's an excellent book. I highly recommend it. It's by Adam Morgan and Mark Barden. And the concept is really simple. You take an ambitious goal, in my case, getting out of debt, and you pair it with a significant limitation or obstacle or constraint, if you will. And in this case, the constraint was time. I want to get out of debt. I'm only going to give myself 7 years to do it. And it's that combination. That combination actually creates tension, right? It's like not just a goal, but it's a goal while I'm limiting myself in some way. In this case, it was time. You could limit yourself with resources. I'm going to start a business, but I'm not going to spend more than $100 on the business in the first year. Well, that would be a good goal, starting a business with a significant monetary constraint. And it's that tension that the authors, that's what they sort of define as a beautiful constraint. And the reason it's so powerful is because the constraint and that tension forces us to be creative. It forces us to think outside the box. It forces us to break from our routines, our habits, our current way of thinking. And in doing so, we can come up with solutions that we've never thought of. Now, sometimes those constraints are self-imposed, right? That was the case for me 16 years ago with getting out of debt. I imposed that 7-year time limit. By the way, I didn't actually meet that goal. I'll talk about that in a second. But I imposed that, right? Sometimes constraints are imposed on us, right? So when the boss walks in and she says, I want the report on my desk by Friday. And you're thinking, there ain't no way that's happening. So that is an externally imposed constraint. In the practice of law, we had them all the time, right? Because the judge would say, your brief is due in 14 days. And you don't normally argue with the judge. You certainly can ask for an extension of time, and he or she may or may not grant it. But that's an externally imposed constraint. And the thing is, when someone else or circumstances impose a constraint on us, if you're like me, we tend to push back. We don't like it. It aggravates us. It frustrates us. Maybe it angers us, right? That response, in the book, they actually call it the victim response. I don't really like that term, but it's the idea is where in response to the constraint, you reduce or change your goals. And they say, look, that's not really ideal. You don't want to try to relieve that tension between your goal and the constraint right away. Now, reality at some point may force you to, perhaps, but that shouldn't be your first instinct. Your first instinct should be, all right, we got an ambitious goal, we've got a significant limitation, constraint. How do we make it work? Let's think outside the box. In my book, Retire Before Mom and Dad, there's a whole chapter on what if, and I kind of use that same concept. In fact, they use that concept in the book. They call it can if. So when your boss comes in and says, this report's got to be on my desk by Friday, you depending on your relationship with the boss, you may say, well, we can do that if you'll authorize some overtime, right? Maybe. As an example, now he or she may say no, and then, okay, maybe you've got to figure out some other way to break that tension or resolve it. But you really want to use the tension to compel creativity. A perfect example of an externally imposed constraint is the Apollo 13. If you've seen the movie or if you're old enough, I wasn't really old enough to remember this, but they had some trouble up there, and they had the whole slingshot around the moon situation. And if you recall, one of the problems was getting I think it's carbon dioxide out of the part of the ship that the astronauts had to move to. They had, devices or whatever, canisters to do that, but they didn't fit in the part of the ship they had to go to. So back in, I guess it was Houston or Florida, wherever they were, they said, okay, we got this constraint. We got a goal. We want to bring these astronauts home safely. Pretty important goal. But we got a significant constraint. As it stands now, they're going to die, and here's why. We need to figure out how to get this, again, I think it was carbon dioxide, out of the air. And by the way, here's what you have to work with. And if you've ever seen the movie, I think they had a big box. They sort of dumped, here's everything in the ship that they can use. And it was like duct tape and covers of manuals. And, talk about, I'm not sure at the time they thought this was a beautiful constraint, but it forced them to get creative and get creative fast. So they had not only a time constraint, they're running out of time, but resource constraint. Here's what we have to work with. It's not like we can order something and send it up to them, right? So that's a perfect example of an external constraint. And if we don't immediately object to it, push it away, try to go around it, try to go over it, if we say, okay, we've got this tension, we've got this goal. We want to get out of debt. We want to achieve financial freedom. We want to become a millionaire. We want to get that next promotion. We want to start our own business. We have this ambitious goal, but here are some significant constraints. How do we, without trying to alleviate the constraints, use them to propel our creativity? So for example, in the debt case, I'll tell you now, we were not debt-free in 7 years. It took us, maybe 10. Now, part of that was by choice as we invested money and decided not to put every dime we had towards debts. Part of it was by choice, but either way, we didn't meet the goal. But it forced me to really think creatively. And this is where I came into sort of things that I believe now, the power of investing small dollars and in the compounding effect of that, the effect of paying off debt early, particularly if it's a high interest rate, the power of refinancing debt to lower interest rates, including 0% on credit cards. We did that for a number of years to get those debts paid off. But in this process, something happened that I could have never predicted in 2005 when I created the beautiful Constraint, right? And that was my personal finance blog. That came 2 years later, almost to the day, 2007. And at the time, I didn't see this as something that could make money to help me achieve my goal of getting out of debt. I saw it as something that could help me sort of share my ideas with other people about everything from getting out of debt to investing. I knew it in theory it could make money, but I had no idea how much. It was just a way to have fun, honestly. It was a hobby, and to write about something that interests me. But what that then generated more creativity, and with content that I was producing and helping other people try to achieve the same thing, not unlike what I'm doing with this YouTube channel. And over time, it turned into a business. Now, that then helped me achieve the goal of not just getting out of debt, not 7 years later, but 10 years later. But hey, I'll take it. It's a great way to fail. Failure never felt so good. But also to achieve financial freedom. But here's the thing. If I'd never created that tension in the first place between an ambitious goal, getting out of debt, and a significant constraint, a 7-year time frame, if that tension didn't exist, I don't know that I would have ever started the personal finance blog. And if that hadn't happened, frankly, I probably wouldn't be in front of this camera talking to you. That tension created creativity that helped me think outside of the box, that ultimately helped me achieve the goal. Another example was the actual blog itself. If someone said, look, I want to create a business that will allow me to have a full-time business that can support my family and that's lifestyle friendly, I can do it from anywhere, and I don't even have to hire employees if I want to. But here's some limitations. You got to keep your full-time job until your business is making a full-time income, whatever that is for you. And you can't invest more than $100 in the business in the first year. Well, boy, talk about constraints. A really ambitious goal, but some pretty significant constraints. Well, that describes to a T what I did. I didn't honestly realize I was doing that at the time. But in the first year, I invested $10 in a domain name. WordPress, what powers most blogs, including the ones I own now, is totally free. And I did it working full time by how? I got up at 5 in the morning, 7 days a week, worked from 5 to 7 or 7:30. Then on work days, went to work, worked on the subway here in Washington, D.C., worked at lunch. I figured out a way to make it work. There was no way I could alleviate those constraints. We didn't have the money to invest in a business. And frankly, at that point, I wouldn't have even known how. I didn't know enough about the business of blogging and websites to even know what to do with. If someone had given me 10 grand to invest, I'm not sure what I would have done with it. So I couldn't relieve the tension of those constraints. I had to work with them, but what it produced was incredible productivity in a very small amount of time. You're familiar with beautiful constraints, by the way, in other circumstances, even if you've not thought about them. One example is the 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss, if you're familiar with it. Obviously, Tim Ferriss, a well-known author and podcaster. His sort of fame was launched with the 4-Hour Work Week. Think about that. That's a beautiful constraint. How can I have a full-time business working just 4 hours a week? By the way, if you know how to do that, leave a comment below. I'd love to know. But that was sort of the concept behind the 4-Hour Work Week. Let me give you a more practical example, perhaps, and that is, imagine if I said to you, you came to me and you said, Rob, I'm having trouble controlling my spending, and I'm tracking every dime, but I still overspend, and I really hate tracking every dime. And I would say to you, okay, how about this? I'm going to add a constraint to your budget. And the constraint is you can't track every dime. You're not allowed to. You can only track 3 expense categories. That's it. Now, at first, you might say, well, that seems silly. Does it? I mean, aren't we supposed to track every dime? That's what everyone tells us, all these tools. Rob, you talk about personal capital. Doesn't that track every dime? Yeah, it does. Now you're telling me not to? Just suggesting maybe this constraint could trigger some new ways of thinking about your budget. If that were the constraint, what would you do? Well, I can tell you what I would do. I would sit down and say, okay, what are the 3 categories of spending that cause us the most trouble, that produce the most surprises? We spend how much on what? It could be buying electronics, clothes, vacations, eating out. Although in COVID-19, probably not eating out, maybe ordering in, but whatever. I firmly believe that if most people who are having trouble controlling their spending actually only focus on the 3 most challenging categories, that'll give them 90%, if not 100% of the benefit of budgeting without having to track every dime if that's not something you want to do. But we need that tension of control our spending, but only in 3 budget categories to think, then start to think, okay, yeah, well, what is really affecting our spending? Anyway, that's the example of a beautiful constraint. I could constrain it more and say, well, how about just 1 category? And you might say, well, Rob, when I think about the categories that are giving me trouble, it's more than 1. I can't limit it to 1 category. It doesn't work. But if you really start to think about it, maybe you'll find other patterns in your spending. For example, maybe that you're spending, overspend in different categories. One day it's electronics, another day it's clothing, it's whatever. But is there other ways to look at it? For example, maybe you're spending whatever the category happens to be is on weekends. You just always, Saturday, you get bored and you go shopping. So maybe the 1 category you need to track is not any 1 expense category like electronics or clothing. Maybe you need to create a Saturday category, right? Or maybe you need to create an after work category. That's the beauty of a beautiful constraint. It forces you, if you allow it, I would say it enables you. That's better than forces you. It enables you to think outside the box, even on things as, let's be honest, mundane as budgeting. All right, so let me just finish off with a couple more examples. And some of these I mentioned in my book, some of them I don't. I just started with the 1, budgeting. I think when we add constraints, it helps us think about budgeting maybe in a different way. I've mentioned how to start a business while working a full-time job with very little investment. A second example, by the way, something I highly recommend. I know it's not for everybody, but if you've followed the channel, you know that once a month, I did it last month, I'll do it again at the end of this month, I give you an update of how my YouTube channel is doing in terms of subscriber count, visitors, and revenue. And it's very small right now, but that small amount of money compounded over time turns into piles of cash. And it's a lot of work. I'm working now as I record this video and hope that the family doesn't start making a lot of racket while I do. But it's also passive in the sense that my YouTube channel makes me money when I'm sleeping. So the ability to start your own side hustle or business, again, I know it's not for everyone, but I think it can really help you propel your finances, and you can have a lot of fun doing it depending on what your interests are. All right, how about this one? How to become a millionaire on an average income. That's one of the things I get from a lot of people who say, look, I make an average income. I'm a teacher. I'm a police officer. I'm not I didn't found Facebook and I don't make 100,000 or more a year. How do I become a millionaire or achieve financial freedom on an average income? And that actually is what the entirety of my book, Retire Before Mom and Dad, is about. But that tension forces you to think differently about money. And part of that change is thinking about money as buying your financial freedom. That we have to spend money to survive, and we want to spend money to have some fun in life, whatever that means for us. But we can also take that too far. And it turns out that with basic math, you can see that with the power of compounding and even some relatively small changes in how you spend your money in your daily habits, someone who makes an average income absolutely can become a millionaire or achieve financial freedom, however you define that. It's absolutely doable. But that's an example of a beautiful constraint. How about this one? How can you reduce your monthly spending? We'll say by $2,500, but that number could be a lot lower or a lot higher depending where you are in your income. We'll use it as an example. How to reduce your monthly spending by $250. But that's the goal, right? What's the constraint? Without significantly changing your lifestyle. That's now we have tension, right? We can all eat out less, take fewer vacations, whatever. Once we start taking vacations, but how do we do that? How do we reduce our spending without significantly changing our lifestyle? It's that tension that years ago, how I came up with the concept of painless ways to save money, and what I call the money audit. And I'll do a video in the future on both. But as an example, when I've asked people who understand these concepts what they've done, I'll hear things like they got a better deal on their life insurance or their car insurance. They changed their cell phone provider and saved $40 a month. Sometimes they cut out things in their sort of daily lives that they were splurging on, which may seem like a lifestyle change, but after about 2 or 3 weeks, they realized they didn't miss it at all. So maybe it was a lifestyle change, but not one that affected their level of contentment at all. So again, you want to keep that tension, save X dollars without changing lifestyle, and then with that tension, start to get creative about ways to do it. The last one I'll mention, and something that I've done for almost 2 years and we're about to change, and that is how to live without a car. So I got rid of our SUV almost 2 years ago. It was in 2018. So I guess almost 3 years ago, or maybe it was 2019. My wife still has a car, but I went without one, which meant I walk and I bike a lot. And I've loved it. In fact, we're getting a new car. I've actually ordered a Tesla Model X. Does that violate everything I talk about? I don't think so, because I would never, ever sacrifice our financial freedom for a car. Certainly not a Tesla, but we're getting a Tesla. But part of it is because, as I mentioned before, we're going to be grandparents. So now we the 2-door convertible we have just doesn't quite cut it. But here's the thing, particularly while you're trying to achieve financial freedom, cars cost a fortune when you add up the lost opportunity cost of investing that money, buying the car, maintaining it, and everything else. And so, how can you maintain roughly your current lifestyle with either no car, or if you're a 2-car family, getting rid of 1 car? And if you're like me, immediately you're going to have 15 objections to this. And this is where I tell people, just take a breath, think about it. And what if you had to? What if it was an externally imposed, a new law? You can only have 1 car. What would you do? How would your life change? If you follow this book, A Beautiful Constraint, and I'll leave a link to this in the description, what you would do is you start to ask questions, the what if or the we can if. All right, we can do that if I change jobs and work closer to home, if we move closer to my job. Well, we can do that if my boss will let me work from home in COVID-19, maybe that's an idea, or if I just change jobs completely, or if we move to another part of the country. Now, you can get even more creative than that. Now, at the end of the day, you may decide, we can't get rid of the car. That's okay. Sometimes when you have this tension between a goal and a constraint, sometimes there's just no way to really resolve them. That can happen sometimes, but you shouldn't just immediately go to that point. Use the tension to create some imagination, some creativity, some thinking outside the box to break your habits, or at least examine them, and examine your daily routines. Again, I've applied this to finances. You can apply it to investing, particularly if you're, say, an individual stock picker. I would say, okay, how can you create a great portfolio with no more than 3 stocks or 5, with only trading 3 times a year, by never selling a stock once you've bought it for at least 2 years. I learned that one, by the way, from Guy Spear, Education of a Value Investor. His sort of rule of thumb is if he buys a stock, he's in it for at least 2 years. How about this? Never buying a stock when the market's actually open, always put your order in after hours so you're not influenced by the daily changes. We can add these constraints to anything, and it forces us to really think about what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, how we can do it better, and hopefully spark some real creative ideas in every area of your life. So that's it. That's a beautiful constraint. It's helped me out immensely in a number of different ways. I hope it helps you out too. If you have any questions, please leave a comment below. I will do my best to help you out any way I can. And please subscribe if you haven't already. Would love to have you as I produce more content like this. Let me know what you like. Let me know what you don't like in the comments. Just please be kind. And until next time, remember, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.